Texas is in the college football playoff for the first time in school history. The Longhorns are the number 3 team in the country, according to the CFP committee. Tommy Yarrish here with Jeff Howe. Jeff, this is a Texas team that 2 years ago was 5-7, and now they head to the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans on New Year's Day with a chance to play for a trip to the national championship game. Your thoughts?
It's amazing, not just that they were 5-7 in year one, it was how they got to 5-7. And you think of all the stuff, Tommy, that led to this, that like 9-10 day stretch where you had the Bo Davis bus rent, the loss to Iowa State, the loss to Kansas. You go through that offseason. Then I think, we forget those first 4 games of 2022, they were 2-2 and lost to Texas Tech and Lubbock. And you kind of start thinking, okay, is Sark the guy? And then they really get it together. And, they had the loss to Oklahoma, but, this is a team, Tommy, that they didn't think about college football playoff. They weren't talking about getting into a national semifinal. They really treated every game since the Oklahoma game like it was a championship game, like it's do or die, like if we lose, our season is basically over. And I think that's why you saw this team have the resolve that it did. And that's maybe the most admirable quality about this team is just the mindset that they've carried with them. I was talking to multiple guys yesterday after the Big 12 championship game, talked to Byron Murphy about it, talked to Kelvin Banks about it, Jatavian Sanders, and all of them to a man said, look, that's the mindset you need to have with, embrace the hate, that target on your back. Jatavian Sanders said, he's like, I knew people didn't like Texas. He said, I didn't know how much they hated us until I got here and started playing. So I think guys really understood what it was going to take to get through this season. And like I said, they never really looked ahead. They never talked about what was next. They really did look at what was right in front of them. And Tommy, it also helps when you're talented enough to be that kind of team. This is a team that wins games along the lines of scrimmage. And that to me is where I think when you look how Sark and his organization have built this, Texas, they probably got the best interior defensive line in the country. They've got an offensive line that if you play to their strengths can be really effective. And I think you look at some of the talent in the pipeline, it's only going to get better. I think at the point of attack, from where they were 2 years ago to where they are now. I know you can look at Quinn Ewers and a lot of different things, the weapons on the perimeter, adding a guy like Anthony Hill at linebacker and Jalen Ford's ascent, but where Texas is, how they can win games at the point of attack like they have throughout the year, like they did against Oklahoma State on Saturday, Tommy, that's what's made the biggest difference in where they were then to where they are now.
And, the biggest worry for Texas fans that you talked about coming into the announcement this morning was the Oklahoma loss. Would that one loss be enough to keep Texas out of the playoff? Conversely, the win over Alabama is actually enough to keep them in and not just get them in, but move them to that number 3 spot instead of the 4 spot. In all honesty, Alabama takes the number 4 spot. I thought Texas would be number 4 with Florida State at 3, but it's Florida State who, the first undefeated Power 5 champion to ever be left out of the college football playoff, who ends up getting the bad end of the stick, and Alabama goes to that number 4 spot. So, Jeff, it shows that, at least for Texas, the head-to-head matters.
The head-to-head matters, and if you're a Texas fan, you lived through 2008 when at the end of the day, head-to-head didn't matter. You beat Oklahoma in the regular season. Granted, the BCS was a different system than the college football playoff. You were dependent mostly on computers and coaches voting the right thing and media people voting the right thing for the human polls, but I digress. Texas fans lived through that, and I think in the back of your mind, that's what you're worried about. Is this going to be 2008 all over again? But you hit the nail on the head, Tommy. I think this is the committee. I think they would have rather set the precedent of, being an undefeated Power 5 champion isn't necessarily a prerequisite if you have the kind of injury along the way like Florida State did with Jordan Travis. That's not as much of a prerequisite as that they didn't want to set the precedent of, you can go schedule really hard out of conference and go play home and homes against really good teams, nationally elite teams. And if you win those games, it might not matter at the end of the day if by and large, for the most part, you take care of your business and put yourself in a position to get into the playoff at the end of the year. You look at what Texas put into that game, Tommy, winning that game. We knew it was huge at the time, obviously, but knowing what we know now, that to me, it's one of the 3 biggest regular season wins in the history of this program. I think it's right up there with the 1969 win over Arkansas. Richard Nixon shows up. President Nixon crowns Texas as national champions. It's right up there with the 2005 road win at Ohio State. that Texas got early in that 2005 season that propelled them to a national championship and that went over USC. I think going into Tuscaloosa, going into Bryant-Denny Stadium, beating Nick Saban by the largest margin of defeat he's ever suffered in a home game in his tenure. They'd won 52 of 53 home games before that game. I think the committee looked at that and rewarded Texas for having the fortitude, the intestinal fortitude, if you will, to schedule really hard. And I think also rewarded Alabama for scheduling hard. Yeah, Alabama got the win over Georgia, but I think if you're going to reward Texas and set that precedent of, yeah, we're going to really value non-conference scheduling, not only do you reward Texas for beating Alabama, but I think you also reward Alabama. Hey, you didn't have to schedule that game. You could have played that at a neutral site, done a one-off, but you rolled the dice and took a chance playing Texas at home. I wouldn't be shocked if when the committee had their roundtable discussions, if Tommy, in a weird way, that didn't end up helping Alabama with losing that game to Texas.
All right, so number 2 seed Washington awaits Texas now in the Sugar Bowl. This is a rematch of the 2022 Alamo Bowl that was a banger between the Huskies and the Longhorns, although now two very different yet somewhat similar teams awaiting this rematch with a chance to go to Houston for the national championship game. Jeff, just curious, your initial early thoughts on the matchup against Washington.
I've watched Washington several times this year, Tommy. I think Kalen DeBoer, I said this last year when we were getting ready to cover the Alamo Bowl. I think he's a phenomenal coach. What he does on offense and where he's taken Washington with Michael Penix and what might be the best collection of wide receivers in the country. You can make the argument that Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell are the best duo, but I think maybe the best collection of wideouts is Washington. And I know you look at Washington on paper and say, okay, how do they match up with the Texas secondary? That's probably not a matchup that you're thinking favors Texas, and it doesn't. But I think the fact that there is some familiarity there, obviously, with having played them so recently. And I think, too, Tommy, you look at the last two games, Texas has done a really good job of taking away the intermediate passing game, the emergence of Malik Muhammad, when Jahdae Barron is able to play in the nickel, even Terrence Brooks at times, the way they're able to really get up on the line of scrimmage and press people, take away the slants, take away some of those gimme passes that were there for opponents earlier in the year. The challenge now is that secondary is going to face a faster, twitchier group of Washington wide receivers, not that different from what they saw with Houston's wide receivers or TCU's wide receivers, and to an extent Oklahoma's group. And those groups gave Texas a lot of problems. So I think you look at that aspect of the matchup, that's I think what everybody's going to be focused on. But, Tommy, just when you thought the revenge tour was over, you look at 4 of the 5 losses last year: Alabama, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and TCU. Texas avenged 4 of the 5 losses. I don't think anybody thought they'd have a chance to go 5 for 5 this year and for the stakes to be this high, but what a story it would be for this team to get to New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl, where there's a few guys on this roster still left from the last time Texas was there. Actually, probably just one with Christian Jones, but to have a chance to finish off this revenge tour, and if you do, you're playing at NRG for the whole thing. It's an amazing story for this team, and it really kind of puts into perspective why this is going to go down as one of the more special seasons in the history of this program.